Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Brothers and sisters, we're back here in our series regarding sicknesses, disease, pestilence, and the above on subjects that are very much relative and related to the circumstance that we are facing as a community around the world. We pray that these lessons are all means and knowledgeable benefits that can help us, our families, and our neighbors as we progress in dealing with the pandemic at hand, one day at a time. Today, we'll be addressing the subject of medicine. We're taking a step out of the manneristic adab we have spoken of in previous lectures, and now we begin the approach, investigation, talk on the subject of the Tub al-Nawawi. This particular phrase is quite common, and it gives reflection upon some of the investigative advice in the Quran, the Islamic theological revered text, and the prophetic tradition, the prophetic canon as well. You'd be surprised that such a subject is very much well versed in both canons, and it is also very much well applicable, investigated, and talked about among Islamic theologians. With that, disease in Islamic thought consists of two forms. When we hear the term disease, we tend to think of bodily effects. Islamic thought talks about two dimensions of disease. Number one is your spiritual disease. Number two is your physical disease. It does provide and argue that the spiritual diseases are more severe than the physical diseases. The argument is, if you are healthy on the inside, you can handle what is on the outside, however large it is. If you are weak on the inside, however large the circumstance on the outside, it will be extremely difficult for you to handle. So Islamic theology and spirituality addresses these two forms of sickness, providing tremendous emphasis upon the spiritual sicknesses, and then building off of it, addressing the physical sicknesses that we as human beings, we face. With that, when we talk about spiritual sicknesses, which is not the main subject of our lesson for today, we are talking about subjects such as doubt in the Almighty, doubt in the Islamic concept of revelation. We are talking about moralistic negativities, such as jealousy, such as illicit preemptive sicknesses towards others. We are talking about, as well, preferring worldly matters over spiritual matters. So these three essentially address the main components, generally speaking, of sicknesses of the soul or the spirit, the greatest of which, again, arguably, is the sickness in doubt towards a creator, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Diseases that attack the body are similar to diseases that attack the spirit. Diseases that attack the body in this spiritual realm and theological discussions is similar to diseases that attack the heart. Diseases and sicknesses and pestilences and epidemics, etc., that attack the masses' physical state, very much so as well, have an interconnected connection to the faith and spiritual state of the person. Just as the Almighty revealed, as Muslims, we believe revelation to be a cure for the spiritual sicknesses we face, just as the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed cures for the spiritual diseases we face as human beings, finding peace in it. Similarly, believe it or not, He has guided remedies for every form of sickness. This brings us to the three traditional stances in Islamic sciences and medicine when discussing the concept of sickness. And here, the subcategory of sickness, physical sicknesses, and physical remedies. Number one, traditional Islamic perspective argues that medicine consists of three basic formulas. Number one is preserving the good health of the individual. Number two, avoiding what might cause harm. Also within this category is strengthening an individual's immunity, immune system, etc. And number three is ridding the body of harmful substances. So pay attention here. These are three traditional focuses if we were to discuss medicine in the light of Islamic thought of old. So traditional medicine of old, where scholars from Islamic theology, who are also scholars in medicine, deduce rulings, actions, prophetic traditions from the two forms of revelation. In Islamic theology, those two forms are the Quran and the prophetic, established, authentic teachings, direct teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. In that process, they argue that essentially there are three basic rules: connections to medicine, preserving good health; number two, avoiding what might cause harm. So, as such, in this umbrella, taking the proper steps to enhance the strength of your immune system, for example. And number three, ridding the body of harmful substances. So Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, in his argumentation, if a person becomes sick, you should look to three things. Number one is how they became sick. And he is a writer who wrote approximately 700 years ago. You should look to the sickness, you should look to how the person became sick, the sickness itself and its effect on the individual, and number three, investigating the cure. And he argues that those three come together when trying to figure out best in how to approach a particular sickness or disease. These are all very important because Islamic theology, it echoes an important aspect. There is always hope. And that is one of the things we had spoken of earlier in our earlier episode of this particular series, where we talked about husnul dhan billah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we read the Quran actually demonstrates these three principles. It demonstrates these three principles: preserving good health, avoiding what might cause harm, and number three, ridding the body of harmful substances. It demonstrates it by general terms, and it demonstrates it by particulars. What I'd like to do here is talk about those three particulars. There are verses that are very much related to actions, and it shows how Islam actually hopes and prefers, one might argue, and holds more important the physical health of the human being in their approach to completing ritualistic acts. And that's extremely important. That is why, for example, Imam Shafi'i's position is he used to prefer the rukhas. He used to prefer the easier way, we will say, the easier way out of something because of the general understanding and maxims of what Islam teaches. So these three particular verses are demonstrative. We have the general verses, maybe some of us know. Do not overstretch your arms, for example, in charitable goods in which you end up harming yourself. And that is why there is a section in Adab al-Mufrad, a famous compilation, where it talks about a balance when a person approaches giving in charity, having a balance where you don't reach a point where you end up destroying yourselves. We also have the general statement some of us might know, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. Don't kill yourself, right? Don't murder yourself. Verily the Almighty to you is far greater in mercy and able to help you in the state of severities due to his mercy, among other things. But the verse, for example, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. Or the verse, for example, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ بِهِ أَذًى مِّن رَأْسِهِ فَفِدْيَةٌ مِّن صِيَامٍ أَوْ صَدَقَةٍ أَوْ نُسُكٍ. Or the verse, for example, إن كنتم مرضى أو على سفر أو جاء أحد منكم من الغائط أو لامستم النساء فلم تجدوا ماء فتيمموا صعيدا طيبا فامسحوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم. So these are very important verses. These three verses actually demonstrate the traditional Islamic sciences on the subject of medicine in connection to the three basic rules: preserving good health, avoiding what might cause harm, and number three, ridding the body of harmful substances. So, as you know, we are really talking about these things in our back of our mind. We are thinking of the COVID virus, for example. We are thinking of diseases that are out there. We are thinking of cancer and issues with health, among other things. And we ask the Almighty for afu wal afiyah. Looking at the first verse and how it demonstrates the concept of preserving good health, and that it takes precedence at times than over ritualistic practices. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. So we know that Ramadan is knocking at our front door, and it is befalling us here shortly. The verse addresses the sick, the one traveling. That is, the sick is allowed to break their fast because of illness. The traveler is permitted to break their fast as well. Why so? When we go back to point number one, preserving good health, as such, the traveler is permitted to break their fast in order to protect and preserve their health. And while doing so, potentially, if you fast in circumstances that are dire, it could lead to something worse. So there is leeway to it, thus preserving the good health and demonstrating the concept we have talked about as a foundation. Islamic medicine essentially addresses three basic rules. Number one, preserving good health. Number two, avoiding what might cause harm. In that field, we have the discussion among Islamic scholars of old, the concept of strengthening immunity, immune system, preemptive public health, which is very important. And what do we find? The discussion in verse فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ بِهِ أَذًى مِّن رَأْسِهِ فَفِدْيَةٌ مِّن صِيَامٍ أَوْ صَدَقَةٍ أَوْ نُسُكٍ. The first example was about one of the pillars of Islam, which is fasting. The second example here is a discussion on one of the pillars of Islam, again, known as the Hajj, the gated pilgrimage. What happens in Hajj, as many of us know, there are certain ritualistic practices we do, and one of those things is known as ihram, a state of ihram, a state of taking a step out of your regulatory habits and placing yourself in a ritualistic, sanctified state. So there are certain clothings you don't wear, certain actions you avoid, among other things. But what is interesting and what is being discussed here is in the Quranic verse, what happens is, it says, what if a person, for example, is having a skin issue upon the head, right, like lice or something of this state? In the state of ihram, you shouldn't cut your hair until you complete the ritualistic practices, certain ritualistic practices. But there is an exemption to the rule, and that exemption is if you are in need. So as such, a person suffering from head or skin diseases like lice, etc., are permitted to shave their head, which is normally denounced in such a state, known as ihram. This actually is example, I apologize, I said number two. This is an example of number three, which is ridding the body of harmful substances which take priority, okay? So we said when we go back to the three basic principles demonstrated in the Quran and that Islamic scholarship deduce from traditional medicine, the three basic rules. Number one is preserving good health. Number two, avoiding what might cause harm. And number three, ridding the body of harmful substances. We have demonstrated how the Quranic verse in connection to fasting falls beneath the first category, which is preserving good health. I had now just spoken of the concept of head lice, skin disease, the act of shaving the head, and that is a form of ridding the body of harmful substances, which takes priority. And this is an example of number three from the three basic rules: preserving good health, avoiding what might cause harm, and number three, ridding the body of harmful substances. If we look to example number two now from our basic pillars of what Islamic remedies essentially address, and scholarship deduced from the Quran, these philosophical natures, applications that are very applicable to the betterment of human society, is the avoiding of what might cause harm now. When we talk of another pillar of Islam, such as prayer, we talk about a key factor to that, which is the evolution, the wudu. And we also discuss within this aspect that sometimes the body could be in a state where the water could cause more harm to the individual. Okay, so this spares the body from repercussions of using water while ill. And how so? There is a leeway in the verse. فمن كان منكم مريضا أو وإن كنتم مرضى أو على سفر أو جاء أحد منكم من الغائط, to the end of the verse, فتيمموا صعيدا طيبا. There's a replacement to the water, and that is utilizing a dry form of ablution in fear that it could, if you are in a state of sickness, it could cause harm, even more harm, serious harm, based upon a serious estimation. So performing tayammum instead of wudu, prayer, this spares the body from repercussions of using water while ill. And as such, what it does, it demonstrates the precautionary or preventative measures, such as diet, etc., that protects the body from harmful substances. What we have looked at thus far, brothers and sisters, in our introduction to Islamic medicine is the concept of sickness. Islamic theology talks about two forms. It emphasizes the first form, sickness of the heart, spirituality, faith, and it also addresses and has quite a bit of emphasis on the physical forms of sickness, discussing the concept of remedies. So medicine is very much intertwined with Islamic scholarship from day one, learning it from the man himself, the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu. These statements that we have talked about here, demonstrating the foundational points of medicine, the three basic points of medicine in Islamic sciences: preserving good health, avoiding what might cause harm, and thus strengthening immunity, and number three, ridding the body of harmful substances, always and has and should always continue to inspire Muslims to look to their faith, to draw energy from their faith to combat sickness, to combat public health issues, intervention, to seek and find cures for the sicknesses that face humanity. We draw from this the discussion on the coronavirus. There is always hope in Islamic theology. This is what it teaches. And as Muslims, we take the proper steps to find and locate and support individuals that are in the front line dealing with it. Similarly, we understand and hope and pray to the Almighty to establish the peace and mercy that is required of here. Until next time, we will talk about specifics and how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ utilized medicine, medical intervention, among others. And then we will look to particulars when we discuss the concept of at-Tibb al-Nabawi in a time for which, as you can tell, medicine is extremely important and it is in the mind of many people. Allah bless you all. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.